and Renny Show is brought to you by Johnston Group, Vittorio Rossi, Trans-Canada Brewing, Lou Ferlin, Cambrian Credit Union, and Homefield.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Wiebe from Sportsnet. Together, we are Kenny and Renny, and this is the Kenny and Renny. It's not a post-game show. It's not exactly a draft preview show. It's not exactly a Pierre-Luc Dubois just got traded show. It's kind of a mishmash of everything all together as we're going to try and make sense and go over what happened with the Jets trading Pierre-Luc Dubois, which I'm sure people are extremely excited about. The return that the Winnipeg Jets were able to get for Pierre-Luc Dubois. We will dive into a little bit of the draft stuff, some of the stuff that's happening around here. I'm down in Nashville. I have to say right now, Ken Wiebe is holding things down back in the peg. So if there's some people that we can have hop on the show here, because there's a whole bunch of people talking a whole bunch of stuff. And let me tell you, it's not just because I'm from Winnipeg. A lot of the chatter that is happening so far down here, the Winnipeg Jets are kind of the talk of it. Everyone knows it's going to be a very, very interesting time here for the Winnipeg Jets. This looks to be the first domino to fall. And it is going to, I would say, it's going to be or continue to be that they're the talk of this. Sounds like David Pagnotta from the fourth period is going to join us on the stretch here. Dave is an absolutely great guy who really is one of the leaders when it comes to breaking news with the Winnipeg Jets. Was chatting with him earlier. I think confident he will be telling us that, you know, the news for the Jets isn't expected to end here. In fact, conversations with him, it sounded like, you know, maybe more would even be done with the Winnipeg Jets here today. But we'll see where that goes. One of the people who I love seeing where things go with is my main man, Kenny Wiebe, who we haven't been up on the podcast world together for a long time. I'm surprised, everybody, I was able to drag him off the golf course for this. He may still be wearing his golf hat. If he stands up and walks across the room at any point during this, you may see some golf pants or some golf cleats on. But main man, Kenny Wiebe, you know him, you love him. Let's bring him into the show. Here comes Kenny. Ken, the people are already in the room. They're asking stuff about food. They're asking stuff about your golf. They're asking everything. Yeah. I want to ask, how have you been, my friend? You are looking good. I hear you're golfing good. What's going on with Ken Wiebe these days?
Yeah, buddy. Nice to see you. But fake news. You know, I'm not golfing. Too busy. I've been surgically attached to my computer since about Saturday morning here. But how the golf tour has been rolling along. Nice to see. Doing some good things out there. Having some fun. But certainly been waiting patiently here for the news that has finally become official with Dubois going to the Los Angeles Kings, which is a destination that we had, identified fairly early in this process, I believe. If folks want to be going back and checking the receipts on that. Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, obviously, first of several moves, I believe, for the Jets. I think we're waiting patiently also for a Blake Wheeler buyout, I believe, could be coming down the pipe here, certainly before the 30th, if they can't get a last-ditch trade with salary retention involved. But yeah, I mean, life is good. Would only be better if I were joining you in lovely Nashville, but
no doubt
you're holding it down along with Luke Fox and Elliot Friedman and Sammy
C, and Jeffy Merritt,
Jason
David
Bukala.
Amber's down here.
It's a big crew.
And Sammy, the big man. It's good. A lot of the great folks from Sportsnet down here, including myself. So
exactly.
That's a big one.
If you do say so yourself, yes. And I think we'll dive in a little bit more on the draft side maybe tomorrow morning or early before Hustler gets on. I think maybe we'll go for a morning. We're sort of just winging it here a little bit just to see what's happening. We're not 100% sure when the availability with Kevin Cheveldayoff will be, whether the Jets will make a couple of these players available. And for those folks who missed it, Pierre-Luc Dubois to the Kings for a package that includes Gabriel Velarde. That's a 2017 11th overall pick from the Kings. They are also sending Alex Iafallo, a very good two-way forward, a middle six forward who plays with some jam, and also Rasmus Kupari, a 2018 first-rounder, just turned 23 years old and will also be a restricted free agent. Velarde has arbitration rights, Sean, and Jets also getting, oddly enough, they are getting the pick in the second round of the 2024 draft that had once belonged, I believe, to the Montreal Canadiens. So I don't think that was I don't think that's an intentional troll job, but I think some folks are going to believe that is part of the package deal there. But yeah, certainly big news from the Winnipeg Jets. And we're going to dive into that a little bit further as we move along. But for folks just joining us that maybe hadn't been on the Twitter machine today, that is the end of the Pierre-Luc Dubois era, and he is going to Tinseltown, not to Montreal.
The funny part about that, and I see Nick Linham here who says to pull off a Rachel Chevy, he's going to have to hit on virtually all these trades. He's 1 for 1, good start, lots of questions still there. I did get a kick over the last little while of like how much vitriol there seemed to be involving Montreal in this. Like I thought it was funny, and I know Nick is a guy who spent a lot of time arguing with Canadiens fans. Yeah. Maybe that had a lot to do with it. I thought it was kind of funny the way that people turned their sights and turned both barrels on the Montreal Canadiens in this situation, because basically Montreal didn't just bend over and roll out the red carpet and send everything they possibly could. Nick Suzuki and everyone in return, like all of these things that we kept hearing. It seemed the Jets fans were angry with the Montreal Canadiens about this, and like every team's just doing what they're doing. Like, we'll get into it. We'll get into the idea of is Pierre-Luc Dubois worth the $8.5 million over 8 years that the Kings have spent on him here. I got a kick out of it. I thought it was really funny that people seem to like the Montreal Canadiens became the bad guys in this situation because Pierre-Luc Dubois kind of wanted to go to Montreal, and it feels like Jets fans expected Montreal to just say, well, you tell us whatever you want. Here's our roster. Pick whatever players you want, and let's just move on with this. I thought it was Chef Richard says, do Habs still think they'll be getting him for free in a year? No, that's not the situation because he's hit that extension. I mean, to me, this part of it is pretty simple. The Montreal Canadiens would make a deal that they thought would work for them. If this was a situation where Pierre-Luc Dubois was going to say, I'm going nowhere else but Montreal, and he would have stayed for one more year with the Jets and just let his, trade protection eliminate, like basically play with the Jets until he was the UFA and then walked away for free, I'm sure the Canadiens would have been happy with that. In the end, the Montreal Canadiens weren't willing to pay a price worth getting Pierre-Luc Dubois, and they definitely, in the process of a rebuild, weren't interested in spending a bunch of the pieces that they've built up towards this rebuild just to get in Pierre-Luc Dubois. I don't understand why Jets fans were so angry about that and why they became the villains in this situation. In the end, they were not. Well, I'll have your take on this. I don't think they meddled. I don't think they did anything. This is misplaced anger in my mind. If people are mad about that situation, they should have been mad at Pierre-Luc Dubois because that's where he wanted to go and that's where he was trying to get to. The Montreal Canadiens are doing exactly what they should be doing in this situation. They're balancing what is worth sending out the door for a player. In the end, they decided that it wasn't worth sending a matching offer down the road. I don't understand why people are mad about it. Apparently you do. Let me have it.
Oh, I'm just saying that the opinion is that if the Canadiens thought that they could get him for a package that was centered around Christian Dvorak, I just think that was. Is it a line that they weren't willing to cross? Sure. I mean, if the Montreal Canadiens really wanted to get Pierre-Luc Dubois, they would have made a better offer, I think is what this basically boils down to.
Exactly.
The interesting part, though, is that, they just went out and sent out a first-round draft pick out the door for Alex Newhook and an early second. So, I'm not saying they're comparable players, but I think that they gave up more for Alex Newhook than they had previously put on the table for Pierre-Luc Dubois. And the Habs aren't a team that are really going to be in salary cap jail for a long time. Like right now they're tight because they have a couple contracts they'd like to get rid of. But again, and I'm not suggesting the Jets fans should be angry at Canadiens fans, but I think that the reason why they were, tossing dirt back in their direction was that they were adamant that there was only one place Pierre-Luc Dubois wanted to go, and that basically Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton weren't going to budge. And at the end of the day, that has cost them the player. So, misplaced anger or not, I think, I certainly think that that's probably why. And, based on, people that we've been talking to, at the end of the day, the Habs just never made an offer that included the level of present day talent that the Jets were looking for in what is a retool and not a rebuild. So that's basically what it comes down to for me anyway.
Well, I mean, and here's the deal in all this. Like all the people who were saying like a package to the Montreal Canadiens should start with Nick Suzuki.
Oh, no. And that was...
The Winnipeg Jets did not land a Nick Suzuki in this trade deal today. Now, it looks like a lot of people here really love this trade. There's an element of this trade that I love in what I think it signals in the kind of team the Winnipeg Jets are going to try to build down the stretch here. But there is no player equally as good as Pierre-Luc Dubois in this trade. I mean, Gabe Vilardi, I like the numbers that he put up this last year. Is he on pace to be the same kind of player as Pierre-Luc Dubois? It does not look like that in this case. But since we're starting to talk about that, Ken, and since a lot of the people in our chat room are weighing in on this, some people saying Chevy's cooking, some people are saying that he absolutely nailed this deal. What do you take away from this deal, Ken?
Yeah, I mean, the player who is best at this age right at this point is obviously Pierre-Luc Dubois, so that's a win for Rob Blake. But if you're looking for what was available, if Gabriel Vilardi is healthy, this is a type of player the Jets don't have a ton of, Sean. We've talked about this for the last 2 or 3 years when we're talking about roster construction. This is a guy that's 6'3", 215 pounds. He's not a physical force like Dubois is, but he's a guy that is a pure sniper. Around the net, really strong in his stick, plays the game hard, high character guy, under team control for, up to 4 seasons. I think there's going to be a bridge deal coming for Gabriel Vilardi. I mean, he's had a lot of injury concerns in the early stages of his career, but last year stayed mostly healthy and was a very impactful player. In terms of Alex Iafallo, I think this is a smart pickup. This is a guy who can play in the middle six for the Jets. He plays with, some sandpaper in his game, but he also was a half-point-a-game performer last year. And for a Jets team that was basically begging to have complementary scoring, this is a guy who has been very effective. I spoke with Mark Spector, our colleague from Edmonton, who's covered the last 2 first-round series between the LA Kings and Edmonton Oilers, and he loved the pickup of Iafallo, or the projected pickup of him, because he's a guy that was noticeable in 2 very exciting series. So, and I think the Jets would also be familiar with him, not only from his play in the NHL, but he played on the University of Minnesota Duluth Bulldogs teams that included Neil Pionk, Carson Kuhlman, and Dominic Toninato. So they probably have eyes on him dating back to him being 19, 20, 21, 22.
Have they mined that program?
Right,
My
for
goodness,
sure.
The Winnipeg Jets, wow.
And Rasmus Kupari is a first round draft pick. So a first round draft pick that hasn't really hit yet. He's been used mostly in a third line, fourth line role, center or wing, probably more likely to be a winger for the Jets, though he could slide into the middle at some point. Plays very hard, a guy who can kill some penalties, excellent speed from the scouts outside the organization that I've spoken to. So they're bringing in a combination of good right now and future potential, and both Vilardi and Kupari both need new deals. I would say they're probably going to be bridge deals, and then once Vilardi can show he can be healthy, and if he projects to be a 30-goal scorer, then at the end of that 2-year bridge, Sean, then you try to lock down the long-term deal with Vilardi that you couldn't get done with Pierre-Luc Dubois. So, and then you throw in a second-round draft pick. So we knew there would always be a futures element in the deal that came with Dubois. Would they have loved to have gotten a first-round draft pick? Of course they would, but we knew that was going to be difficult to obtain. Having said that, they've got a second for next year's draft, which, according to the folks who pay very close attention to that, going to be a deep draft there as well. But let's be honest, the Kings are expecting to be a contender, so that pick is probably in the 55 to 64 range, or even higher, maybe 56 or 58 to 64 range if things go as well for the Kings as they would like it to go. Now, having said that, I think that the Jets did well in this trade in particular, but also too in my column that will be posted at sportsnet.ca shortly. The fact that Kevin Cheveldayoff did the best that he could in this scenario will not eliminate or erase the fact that the overall trade for Pierre-Luc Dubois that brought him here is not going to turn out in his favor under any circumstance anymore. So that he did the best that he could, and that the next part of the tree is looking positive for the Jets. That's important because he wasn't going to be able to rewrite history. But I don't think that this just says, hey, forget about what it costs to get Pierre-Luc Dubois here for 3 seasons. That part of the deal will go down for me as a swing and a miss, even though Dubois himself grew as a player. But the Jets won 5 playoff games in those 3 seasons, and ultimately they didn't keep the player.
Yeah, and when you talk about the trade tree here, this comment by John Wolf 18 says IFL is an expensive third liner. Kupari will help the Moose.
He's not on the
Lardy's
Moose,
a half line. So Yarmo won this trade. I do say this. There's no way around this, and I know that there's already. I know that there's Jets fans who said that sending Line down the road and getting 2 years of Pierre-Luc Dubois, no matter what the Jets got back, was a good trade. They liked that. To me, you have to look at this and you have to say this trade essentially is Patrick Laine and Jack Roslovic for Gabe Vilardi, Alex Iafallo, Rasmus Kupari, and Danny Zilkin. And then you add a second-round pick in there as well. So, if at the time when you were moving Patrick Laine, you would have said, would you have been okay with this haul? Gabe Vilardi was picked in the league at that time. Alex Iafallo, prospect as well. If at that time you would have traded Patrick Laine and Jack Roslovic for a package or a prospect package of Gabe Vilardi, Alex Iafallo, Rasmus Kupari, Danny Zilkin, would you have been happy with it at that time? I would suggest Jets fans wouldn't have been happy with it at that time. Are Jets fans happy with that return for those 2 players at this time? I'm not sure if they are. I take a look at this and I still do think and go back to the idea that had the Jets been able to handle the Patrick Laine situation properly, that would have been the best course. I think, this trade puts the Jets in a little bit of a lesser spot than they would have been had they locked down Patrick Laine, kept him happy, continued him on the development path that he was already on. But that said, the one thing that I really like about this deal to me is what I think it signals. And what I think it signals is, rather than the Winnipeg Jets, and we've talked about this for years, rather than the Winnipeg Jets being a team that, locks up there and has these uber skilled players and then kind of just throws everything at those uber skilled players, kind of forgets about the 4th line, doesn't really have, a team that could never kind of have the depth to compete with teams that did walk in with depth, like what we saw this year in the playoffs with the Vegas Golden Knights, where they just couldn't handle that kind of depth. This to me signals more of approach of what's made the LA Kings good the last number of years has been exactly that they've got a lot of these players that they can go down the lineup and be like, well, this guy, he's not as good as Mark Scheifele. He's not as good as, as a Kyle Connor or something like that. But Alex Iafallo can be a difference maker out there. And so when you collect enough of these guys, what you are signaling is that you're a team that is going to be a team. And I think that this, with the idea and the expectation that they're still going to move on from Mark Scheifele and that they're still going to move on from Connor Hellebuck, tells me that this is more an idea that the Winnipeg Jets, in their retool, which they've tried to do here, and that's something we could discuss as well, the retool versus the complete and total rebuild. But the idea of the retool is that the Winnipeg Jets are going to try and collect a lot of good hockey players, not necessarily guys shooting the lights out, a lot of good hockey players, and then put a good full team out on the ice that can go out and compete. I think it's well past time for that, well past the era of the Winnipeg Jets that just gave every single opportunity over and over again to an elite set of players that over time showed that they couldn't really get that done. I think this trade is the early signal of a change in philosophy for the Winnipeg Jets. And let's be honest, they needed a change in philosophy. Before we bring in David Pagnotta here, before you do this, Ken, I just want to make sure we get this in here. We have some sponsors for this show, and we like to say it's like, you know how sometimes you head out to the lake for the summer, especially when you're a kid, and you had those friends out there, right? Like Seinfeld did a good play on it where there was like a summer George that Jerry would hang out with. You get those guys out at Grand Beach or out at Falcon Beach or whatever that you hang out with, and we're going to kind of try and do that with our sponsors. We're bringing in some summer friends here that we wanted to show off to y'all. The first one being our friends, our summer friends right now, over at Pristine Roofing, who are coming on board. A lot of this was done through our good friend North End Rick, who works at Pristine. Got to say, really happy to have them in the fold. If they like what they see here, it could be that our summer friends could become our winter friends as well. So what we'd like you to do is head out. I know that it's roofing season. A lot of people need roofing or siding done. If you are looking for someone, I can tell you this, as a former roofer myself, I really like the way that they handle their business. If you need something like that done, why don't you give them a call and make sure you tell them that Kenny and Renny sent you. Also, excited to have on board for the summer our good friends at the Keg, and I don't think I need to explain to anyone what the Keg is known for and what they're good at. I know my nephew, every time I get these little things where I'll challenge him to a little competition, and every single time when it's who's going to be the winner of this thing, if he wins, he always wants me to take him for dinner out at the Keg, because he's a growing boy. He's 6'1" now, 15 years old, 220 pounds. He likes to eat. While you go to the Keg, they will feed you really well. They'll feed you a lot of it. Great food at the Keg. Really excited to have them both on board. Like I said, summer friends right now that we're hoping will be sticking around, winter friends. Again, if you're heading down to the Keg, tell them Kenny and Renny sent you. Ken, you have something to say before we bring in Pagnotta?
No, all good. Just I had messed up there. So since the pick was Montreal's, I said it was LA's pick. It would be closer in the 50s. It could be in the 30s to the 40s, depending on how the rebuilding season of the Montreal Canadiens goes. So it's a higher end pick here than it possibly would have been if the Jets had even gotten the Kings second rounder, which is 54th in the 2023 draft. So my bad there.
No doubt. All right, Kay, we're going to bring in the man, the myth, the legend, David Pagnotta, who I always love seeing. Didn't get to see him at the Stanley Cup final this year, but I only had to wait a few more weeks. Here's our main man who I was chatting with earlier today at the Patrick Alvin Canucks Avail. David, I know this wasn't a surprise for you. You were one of the leaders on this deal and getting the information out there. Kind of take us through from the beginning for you, what you picked up on where you thought that Pierre-Luc Dubois was going to go, when you thought it was over between them and Montreal, and ultimately how he ended up in LA.
Yeah, you know what, guys? This I'm going back about 2 weeks where we started to get wind that LA was going to take control of this race and kind of really be part of this. And it was just them pretty much from that point on where they were the focal point. And the Canadians and a couple other teams that were in there were, back and forth a little bit, but it was really LA. So for the last couple of weeks, and it's been them. The last few days really is when things really got serious, and they were able to come to terms on the parameters of this deal, being Kupari, Velarde, and Iafallo. There was some talk that the Jets may flip Iafallo, and that could still be a possibility. But for the time being, he's a Jet, and I think the last 2 days is really when even they started to realize that they were going to be part of this. The players didn't know prior to a couple of days ago that they were potentially part of this mix. And so it tells me that this really got firmed up relatively recently.
Ken, you want in on this, or I can keep going?
Sorry, buddy. I just posting my column here on Dubois. So you go one more and then I'll be ready to roll here.
So, Dave, I want you to give me an idea here of what leverage the Jets were able to hold in this situation, because the one thing that we'd heard over and over again was they really didn't have a lot of leverage over the Montreal Canadiens. In the end, the way I look at it, and maybe you can give some insight into this. I asked Kent Hughes about it, and he did not want to talk about this situation afterwards. Clearly so. I mean, some guys will say, it wasn't a fit or whatever. He did not want to talk about it. For you, you talk about the LA Kings claiming and taking hold of this situation. Where do you think the Montreal Canadiens lost hold of this situation?
They just weren't willing to give up I think near the equivalent value overall. I mean, Gabe Vilardi is a good hockey player. He's a very good hockey player, and he's got some injury issues that he's been dealing with. But he's a guy that can step in here. Now, they had the other kind of indicator in this. There were no contract talks. He's a restricted free agent between LA and Vilardi's camp since the season ended. So they were kind of just waiting. They thought maybe something might be up here, and then obviously he's part of this. But he's a strong player and a very good player and a versatile type of forward. You add in Kupari, who needs a little bit more time and more not necessarily experience, but more of an opportunity to gain more minutes. He wasn't getting that in Los Angeles. They have a plethora of young talent and kids coming up in the system. So, he was expendable from that front. And then Iafallo, a combination of making the money work, but also you're getting a 40, 50-point guy that can play the left side and is a strong middle six type of forward, which he proved with Los Angeles. Now, again, we'll see where this ends up because there's still some chatter that he could be flipped in another deal. But we'll kind of wait and see how that kind of unfolds. But the Canadians Josh Anderson was, my understanding, one of the players that was discussed. But beyond that, there really wasn't much in terms of what the Canadians were willing to give up to come near what LA was ultimately sending.
Yeah, it sure seems like what they had, and they've got a vision in Montreal that they're and Dak really came in and really did well and fit into that vision. And clearly they've got Caulfield and Suzuki. What I always took from it was the idea that they had this vision. They like this vision. They didn't want to detract from that vision. They loved the idea of adding Dubois to that vision, but not at the cost of the vision as it was currently built. Right.
And they don't need to expedite their rebuild process. I mean, they're still going through it, and there's still some other moves. Like the Habs we've got Mike Hoffman out there and Joel Edmondson that's out there as well. They've got a few other things that are cooking at the moment. So I don't think the Canadians are done by any stretch after adding Alex Newhook, today. And there's also some talk. They've talked to a few teams about moving back in the draft from the 5 slot. So we'll see kind of what they have here. But you're right. They've got a plan. They're sticking to it. And if Dubois came cheaper, they would have pulled it off. Otherwise, they're following their path.
Dave, just a quick one on Kupari, a guy. Yeah. Do you like him? Do you prefer him on the wing or at center? I know he was more of just a 10-minute player last year. Heard he killed some penalties, has really good speed, which will help the Jets. But where do you like him, or what do you see him as a long-term fit? Because for me, I heard Vilardi probably more of a fit on the wing, just maybe due to the foot speed there with the injuries that he's dealt with. But what about Kupari?
Honestly, I think it depends on who he's kind of lined up with and matched up with. You're right on Vilardi. I think he's better suited for the wing, and I think that's where he needs to be in order to kind of exploit his talents in the right way. Kupari, third line type of center, but mid-6 type of winger, if that makes sense. I think there's more potential for him to be more effective as a winger, but I think he wasn't really given much of an opportunity to play consistent minutes in LA at the center position. So unless he gets that in Winnipeg and starts to harness that a little bit, maybe. But for now, for me, it's more likely on the wings.
What does Dennis say about this situation? Because I know that Dennis, I'm not saying that you're not entirely plugged into the LA Kings, but Dennis, your partner, is entirely plugged in. Much more, entirely plugged in with them. What kind of, because essentially the Canadians have done the same thing with Alex Newhook, right? Like what they were saying today, and I would assume that the Newhook as a reaction to, okay, well, Dubois is not out there anymore, so we're going to go give this player a try. The Canadians are thinking that a good young player on a really good team who, struggled to find and break in on that team may have a lot more to give. From what Dennis has said about this situation, what you can glean yourself, how much more would these players have to give on a little bit more of a wide open Jets roster that can give them more opportunity?
Yeah, I think you're going to, at least from Velarde's perspective, see more of the offense kind of kick in for him, not necessarily having to be responsible from a defensive side of things. And that's not to say that he can't be and didn't really have that in LA. But I think with how the Kings were matched up and with some of the offensive weapons that they had with, or have rather, with, Kempe and Kopitar and Fiala, they were the driving force from the offense. So I think Velarde now will be given a bit more leeway and a bit longer leash to be more offensive with the Jets and their system. I think Kupari has that potential as well, to kind of let loose a little bit, and his foot speed, you mentioned, a little bit better than that of Velarde's. But I think these are two guys that, given the right opportunity, and sometimes you touched on it, Sean, with Montreal, just giving guys more of an opportunity and let them run with it. Sometimes, it really pays off dividends. It's worked with some of the guys in the Habs. Like Aiden Hill came in and took the reins in Vegas as the goaltender, and now he's popping in a nice, deal just under $10 million for a couple of years. So sometimes you just need that opportunity to kind of roll.
Dave, where do you feel like the Kings stand with Jonas Korpisalo staying on the goaltending front? Because for me, if the Jets eventually have to move on from Hellebuck in a trade, which I know has been some chatter around Nashville, I think Korpisalo is a great fit for the Jets to pursue in free agency. And I actually kind of wondered if they might try to get his rights sent in this deal, or do you think LA was waiting to clear the money to know what they had to take a run at Korpisalo here before he becomes a free agent on July 1st?
I think they're going in a different direction. There hasn't really been much with Korpisalo. And I think LA wants to go in a different direction from a goaltending perspective. So I think Tristan Jarry's on their radar. So we'll see kind of, how that kind of rolls for LA. But I'm anticipating Korpisalo hitting the market on Saturday.
So I don't want to get here's the deal. Dave, you do your job. You do your job really well. You and I have had conversations earlier on today. Some of that's fit for print, some of it's not. So you give me an idea right now, because I know that the Winnipeg Jets are probably one of the most, if not the most interesting teams heading into this week. This has the feeling to me of the first domino to fall. What else are you hearing on the likes of Mark Scheifele, Blake Wheeler, Connor Hellebuck, and what do you think happens in those situations now that this first domino has finally fallen?
I could tell you it's been fairly quiet on the Scheifele front. I think that's going to pick up, but up until last night, or this morning rather, it had been pretty quiet on that front. Now, I know Boston's kicked the tires a little bit and to at least initiate those types of conversations. I don't know how much how serious any of those conversations have really gotten to this point. Now, maybe that's because they wanted to focus on PLD and figure that all out. But I know it's been quiet there, and things on Hellebuck's side really started to simmer after it kind of got leaked out there that he wants over $9 million a year on a deal. That's taken a lot of teams their backs up against the wall and going, we're going to look and see what other options might be available out there. And that's definitely affected the trade situation. I don't think Chevy was too happy that got out there because it's definitely limited his options, and it's quieted things down quite significantly.
Do you think part of that, though, is a little bit of posturing from teams who are interested? I mean, everyone's trying to say it's a saturated market. Yes, there are goalies available, but not a lot of those goalies available are at Hellebuck's level when it comes to his regular season performance and some of the playoff performance as well, right? I mean, to me, again, nobody is out here saying that we're going to give you the best package that we have, but I'd be curious to see if things kind of pick up here still. And even, too, the other part of that, Dave, too, is that with his 6.17 for next year before the cap goes up, that's a lot more palatable for teams that might be a little closer to the ceiling. I mean, even though, are there some teams that you might think would be, I know naturally some teams are talking about New Jersey or maybe Pittsburgh. I mean, who are some of the teams that you think make sense for Hellebuck? Because, I mean, a lot of people actually thought that it made more sense for LA to pursue someone like Hellebuck rather than Dubois. That's what some of the speculation has been the last few days here.
It really comes down to a team system. And you look at some of these clubs, especially the last 2 years that Colorado and Vegas have won. They had stacked rosters, strong decors, deep decors, every one of their forward lines can contribute offensively if it needed to. You were able to mix things up where you had physicality on every line. So the deeper the team, the more talented the roster and the skaters are, you can get away with going on, the combo, 1A, 1B kind of scenario. If you want to platoon guys, you get away with that a little bit easier when you've got really, really deep rosters out there. For teams that want, and look, Tampa gets away with it because they drafted him and they kept him around and all that stuff. Vasilevsky's phenomenal. It's a different dynamic there in Tampa. But, for other teams that are out there that want this player, if you're going to pay a premium for him, well, we want to make sure that the contract makes sense for us, doesn't hurt the rest of the potential of this roster in adding some chips. And then at the same time, I'm not going to give it up if I don't know that I have him long term. I'm not going to pay the premium. So I'll give you X, Y, and Z. You want A, B, C. Well, I need that contract to go down. That's why it's been the last few days. It's been a little bit more difficult for Chevy and the staff to try to get something going here because that number has scared off a few people, at least for now.
What I find this fascinating. This is probably going to be more along the lines of not what you've heard, more along your opinion. I love your hockey opinions, which is why I ask. But the idea of Connor Hellebuyck, who's basically come out and said, you know what, nothing means anything to me anymore other than the Stanley Cup. The Vezina would be fine. That's great. But I want to win the Stanley Cup. But there's got to be, in my mind, a correlation between that guy who's like, nothing matters in my career anymore other than the Stanley Cup, and being the guy who maybe takes a couple million less on his contract to make sure that his team can balance the finances to make that happen. And I just want your opinion on the idea of where you think Connor Hellebuyck could end up. Is he the guy who's going to walk out of this and say, no, I'm a $9 million guy and I'm going to win a cup? Or do you think this gets to a point where he starts looking around the league and when he has some suitors and the potential for a sign and trade, he looks and says, look, I could have an opportunity to win a cup there for years, but it's not going to be at $9 million a year. It's going to be at 7.75. Where do you think his mindset goes with that?
I mean, it doesn't sound like it aligns because, I want to win, but I also want 9.25 a year. So
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, look, he can look at Vasi and go, well, this guy's pulling it off and they can do it in Tampa. So why can't you? So I get that argument and I get that sense. But at the same time, if it's Toronto, for example, well, all right, I'm not going to get $9 million in Toronto, but would I take $7 to be there long term? Maybe you add an extra year on the deal to help out the Leafs a little bit. I'm just using this as an example. Or whatever other club is in a similar situation that their goaltending is a little unclear. You do that like LA. We can use LA as the example. Maybe that's a scenario where it's less money, but you feel like they're ready to win now. We'll give you a little bit more term. I don't think he's hitting the max 8 years on a deal, and he can't. He's not going to be able to sign it anyway until July 1, which also makes the sign and trade things a little bit difficult this week if you're utilizing draft capital. But I get it. At the same time, for a lot of these guys, and I'm sure his agent's just like, take the money's $9 million, just stop. Don't take less, but maybe a little bit. But there are some players that do offset things. Like Torrey Krug, for example, he took less money to sign in St. Louis in order to get that no trade protection.
Right.
He exercised that right as he should if he wanted to, but he took less in order to get that. So there are players that certainly make concessions, and some players that take less in order to help the rest of the team win, like Boston has done, and others to try to help themselves.
Two other teams kind of interest me quite a lot, and one of them is the guy who signed Vasilevsky to that long-term deal, running a different team now. What do you think about Detroit for a potential landing spot for either Scheifele or Hellebuyck? And secondly, I'm curious for your thoughts about whether either one of those players could fit in Boston. Lots of talk about the goaltending there, and we know they were going to move $6 million off the books with Taylor Hall moving on. Curious if there's any fit there. Lots of talk about Ullmark being maybe moved or Swayman needing to play more. I mean, curious what your thoughts are on those two situations, and if either one of the Jets players who could be available might land in either one of those destinations. I
think Scheifele more so on the Boston front. I know I mentioned, they reached out. Now that the Dubois deal is over with, I've got to, and the likelihood and the expectation that Wheeler's getting bought out. I think the focus now shifts to both of those guys. And with Scheifele and the Bruins or whoever else might be interested at that center position. They said today, Cam Neely said today, that they're moving forward the notion that both Krejci and Bergeron are done. So you've got to kind of fill that void in some respect. Yeah, you mentioned they cleared out the $6 million. Well, most of that's going to go to Tyler Bertuzzi because they just started to initiate those conversations today to try to get him locked in. So it's tough to navigate, certainly because of the cap era. I talked to, and a few of the GMs, and Alvin mentioned this today as well, that the market's out there and there's a lot of talk, but that $1 million bump in the cap it hasn't really helped much. So it does make things a little bit difficult. And I forgot the other team you mentioned. I'm sorry.
Detroit.
Oh, right. Yes. I think they're looking a little younger.
Okay.
I think and Alex DeBrincat, I think, is a guy that they're trying to make happen. I know they also were in on Konechny out in Philly, and there was an offer on the table, and it's kind of left in Detroit's hands right now to see if they can make something work there. But I know they really like DeBrincat and would like to make something work. But would they give up the 9th overall pick for him? I don't get that sense, not yet. But Steve Yzerman also told everybody to zip it and you want to keep your job, nothing better get out there. So it hasn't been easy trying to get information from the wings,
right?
As it normally isn't with Stevie there.
Dave, I wanted to get your opinion on this. It's a copycat league, and so if you take a team like the Boston Bruins, who just had a super deep, really good roster, play the game the right way, and they elevate a goaltender no one was expecting to win the Vezina to that stage, and then you get the goaltending carousel of backups that we had on the cup-winning Vegas Golden Knights. And I think even if you take a look at a guy like Vasilevsky or even Bobrovsky, like the guys who you would say were at some point or in the Hellebuyck kind of level, those are two really great goaltenders. But one is on the President's Trophy winners from last year, a really stacked roster, and the two-time cup-winning Tampa Bay Lightning and a super stacked roster. I'm wondering if looking at these teams and people are taking a look at the goaltenders and saying, yeah, goaltending wins championships, but it usually wins championships on really stacked teams that are deep and know how to play the game the right way. And I wonder if that's affected the market for Connor Hellebuyck this year, who we've seen what he looks like on a team that sometimes doesn't look like a playoff team. You can drag them over that playoff line, but his success has never really translated in the playoffs. No one is, writing long opus columns about Connor Hellebuyck being a Stanley Cup winning goaltender and dragging his team into winning series that they should not be winning.
I think it's also the fact that you've got a very deep goaltending market. There are a lot of goalies that are, John Gibson's out there. We'll probably hear Thatcher Demko's name a couple times again, popping out of Van. Tristan Jarry's a free agent. Freddie Anderson's a free agent. Yeah, you guys mentioned Ullmark and Swayman, one of those guys. I think there are teams that might be poking there. There are a lot of different options, and I think that's more so going to affect at least the immediate market for Hellebuyck right now. Dollars aside, I need to figure out what my options are, and then kind of moving in that direction. Carter Hart as well, also available, and Philly's close there, but everyone's kind of waiting to see how the Hockey Canada stuff kind of unfolds before making any final decisions with him. But there are a lot of goalies that are out there, and if Jersey makes a move, what does that mean for Vanacek? Are they going to keep him, or are they going to move him out somewhere else? Korpisalo as well. So the biggest issue right now, at least from the goaltending side of things, is there's so many options, and with the extension in place, do I want to get you get Helly for a year at 6 whatever, and then it's $8-9 million after that, let's say, or can I get John Gibson for $6 million for the next 3 years and be happy with that, and then worry about my goaltending situation down the road? That's future goalie problems. So I think all of these little elements are coming into play here for the Jets and for the goaltending market in general.
One of the other things, positions of surplus for the Jets is defense. David, curious if you've heard anything on that front, whether it's Dylan DeMello, Brendan Dillon, whether even guys like Logan Stanley, Ville Heinola on more of the prospect side. Curious, obviously every team is looking for defense. I have to think that the logjam is going to start to get, especially with the Jets not getting a second rounder here. in the deal with the Kings for the 2023 draft. I have to wonder if you've been hearing anything on those fronts.
A little bit on Stanley and Dylan, but nothing that makes me think that something is close here. Now, I will also say this. I was told this morning that something was going on with the Jets that was beyond PLD, but it wasn't also Hellebuck or
Scheifele.
Thank you. Yeah. Scheif. So I think it's a little smaller scale, but and I thought that might be it. And obviously maybe it's the buyout. I'm not sure later on, but it sounds like there is, every team's really working the phones and busy. And obviously we've got the draft tomorrow. So everyone's trying to get ahead of things. But Dylan and Stanley are two names that I've heard are out there. But is anything close? I'm not too sure yet, to be honest.
This is my last questions for you, and I'm going to do a rapid fire one or the other. It's basically yes or no questions, but
all right.
Pierre-Luc Dubois for Gabe Vilardi, Alex Iafallo, Rasmus Kupari, and a second-round pick. Did the take away the idea that, that are the Jets a better team having made that trade? Did they win this trade? Regardless of what kind of leverage they had, did they win this trade?
I like the package. I really do. If they keep Iafallo, if they ship him for another guy, whatever it is, I think they're deeper right now because Vilardi has that potential. If Dubois is plateauing at the 60 points, 65 points, whatever it is that he pulled off this year, I think Vilardi has that capability of getting there. Then you have Kupari. Then you have Iafallo, who's a 40, 50-point guy and good in the secondary scoring market. Now, look, I think we can all agree Dubois is the best player in this deal. But in terms of the overall package here, I think the Jets came out really, really good in this deal.
And quickly, so if we extrapolate this to how the Jets ended up with PLD in this situation, Patrick Laine and Jack Roslovic for Gabe Vilardi, Alex Iafallo, Rasmus Kupari, Danny Zilkin, and a second-round pick. Did the Jets win that deal? And keep in mind, it's not like the injuries and stuff that have happened since the track that Patrick Laine was on and Jack Roslovic were on. If you take those players as Jets and make this trade, did they win that trade? Has Chevy redeemed himself? Essentially, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, right. I think they did well. Like honestly, I think Vilardi is and. Speaking to somebody that was very close to him, he's excited at the opportunity to get a little bit more, again, ice time, more scoring opportunities, more offensive opportunities in this one from an ice time perspective, and be one of the guys. Obviously, there's a lot there in Winnipeg, and obviously, Kyle Connor kind of leads that offensively. But I think this is a good add, and I think a good complement to Perfetti and Connor as well.
Heard a lot of great things about the person also, Dave. You mentioned knowing him.
Good guy, yeah.
At the end of this, what we expect will be a bridge deal. Is Gabe Vilardi a guy that can become a foundational pillar for the Winnipeg Jets in a way that maybe Pierre-Luc Dubois hasn't been, or he was on the ice, but not to extend? I mean, is this a guy that they could extend for 7-8 years at the end of a bridge deal and kind of build a franchise around?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for him to be a legit core piece on a team. And again, complementing what they've got with, Perfetti and Connor and Morrissey and Ehlers, just from an age kind of side of things, I think this is a really good fit for them. And again, and Iafallo's, I think, 28. So it kind of fits in there a little bit as well. But from a core perspective, I think Vilardi has the potential to be one of those main guys.
And then a quick one on the LA side, David, for Dubois. How big a factor is going out and getting a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois in terms of who the Kings are going to have to try to supplant first within the Pacific Division and then to try to knock out a rejuvenated Colorado Avalanche team? You're trying to go through the Edmonton Oilers and the Stanley Cup champion Vegas Golden Knights, but you're trying to do that with Anze Kopitar, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Phillip Danault down the middle.
Makes you a hell of a lot deeper now. One of the biggest issues, especially against Edmonton, was the fact that it was just Kopi and Danault that were going up 1-2. Well, and their third line wasn't as strong. This now gives them the opportunity to really strengthen their overall unit to play against those teams, Edmonton's and Colorado's and Vegas's. And then it also gives you the opportunity to move and to keep Quinton Byfield, A, keep him, and B, likely on the left side.
Right.
So now you can focus on him being a winger, at least for the next few seasons. and they tried doing that towards the end of the year, playing with Kopitar and I want to say Fiala. So I think this is it gives them some options now, but definitely without question makes them a lot stronger up the middle. At least come playoff time, maybe we see Dubois play a little on the left side every now and again, but I think come playoff time, having that 1-2-3 punch makes LA really, really strong.
I'd also say that's a pretty good three to be able to, if you're protecting a one-goal lead against Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, not a bad three players to be able to toss over the boards if you're Todd McClellan.
Right, exactly. That's
especially since they haven't been able to hold down that team with the two great guys that they've had so far. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Danault has done an admirable job, but again, even if you're shutting those guys down, you're utilizing all that ice time. You need that third unit to really get things going. And I think with Dubois potential at being at that position, or maybe it's, he excels and it's Kopitar's line or whatever, but now you get three units that can really do damage at both ends of the ice.
Ken, I don't know if you're done. If you are, I think it's time to let Dave get back to breaking stuff, what he does best. Dave, love having you on the show. Love being able to see you down here. I'm looking forward to the next couple of days with you, my friend. Great job here. I know that our audience is extremely happy that you came on. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with them, bud.
Absolutely.
Great to see you, man, even if it's from a distance.
Yeah.
Good seeing you guys as well. Sean, stay hydrated.
I'll do my best. See you, Dave. I want to get into this, Ken. We can't really tear down this deal or look into this deal without talking about what the LA Kings ended up paying. $8.5 million a year to have Pierre-Luc Dubois there. I have to say this. I'm just going to say this. You can respond to this however you want. If I'm the Winnipeg Jets, and you know what, this is along the lines of when you wrote the article that you thought Pierre-Luc Dubois would be staying and locking down with the Winnipeg Jets for years. I think this is right in line with what you expected him to sign his deal for. I have to say this, for a 63-point player who's capped so far, I don't think this is where Pierre-Luc Dubois lands. I think he's got the potential to go on further if he is able to get to a stage where he can find the consistency and play, the last third of last season the same way he played the first 2/3 of that season. He's a player who's worth $8.5 million. But I have to say, I think that this is a risk at this stage. And one of the reasons I think it's a risk is because, to your point, Phil Danault is a guy that is going to be given his ice time. Like, he is the man that you want on the ice, shutting things down for the other team. And because he spends a lot of time on the ice, and we all know their number one C there, as long as he keeps playing the way he is. He played the Winnipeg Jets this year and single-handedly beat them in a game. I still put him above Pierre-Luc Dubois. So the way I see this deal right now, I do have to say I'm not the biggest fan of it for the Kings, not only because of what they gave up to get him, but because it looks to me like you've got Pierre-Luc Dubois as an $8.5 million third-line center. I have to say the construction of this, I love the idea of having a really deep team, 1, 2, 3, but I think there's better ways to get that center depth and spread the money around. I'm not the biggest fan of it. What do you think?
I love the deal for LA. Kopitar is 35 years old, even though he's playing at an extremely high level. His next deal's, let's just say, for example, maybe you cut it in half, maybe it's $4 or $5 million. For next year, they're paying a big ticket down the middle. It's 10, it's 5.5, and it's 8.5. In terms of Dubois, I think it's a good number. Obviously, there were some people who believed it could go as high as 9.15, like Matthew Barzal had, and obviously we know that the numbers have not hit that level yet. But yeah, the next piece of the puzzle for Pierre-Luc Dubois is to become a 30-goal, 75 to 80 point player. I mean, Dubois himself has always said it's not only about points for him, and that is 100% accurate. He is a shift disturber. He draws a lot of penalties. He does take quite a few as well, yes, but engagement level is high. He's a powerful man. Again, we've talked about this a ton. I mean, the only mark against Dubois during his last 2 seasons is that he was a point-a-game player for more than half the season. Last year, 52 points in 52 games, but he finished with 63. I would say part of that was his body breaking down, but that's the next step for Pierre-Luc Dubois, as now he becomes a 25-year-old guy. He needs to move from being at 8.5 million, even with all of the intangibles and all the potential. He needs to become a 70 to 80 point player, and while still doing all of those things and being a physical force and being a little bit more consistent. But I don't see a whole lot of risk for LA. I mean, obviously there's any time there's a risk when you're paying almost $70 million on the course of a package. He's not a guy who is in his, Mark Scheifele is going to be 30, he's 30 years old, going to be 31. So investing in a 25-year-old player with the high ceiling, I see no issue with that with Rob Blake. I mean, there's risks attached to every player, but I think it's a smart deal for the LA Kings. Is Pierre-Luc Dubois going to play all 8 seasons with the LA Kings? That we have no idea on. And, if going back to your original thought about Kent Hughes, I mean, it's certainly possible. But if you're Kent Hughes, and I have a theory on Kent Hughes, and again, I don't know Kent Hughes at all. I never dealt with him when he was an agent. But if you're Kent Hughes, and at the end of, let's say, in 4 or 5 years from now, when the Canadians are actually moving out of the building stages and into the competitive stages, is it possible that Kent Hughes will revisit this Pierre-Luc Dubois scenario when he's 29 or 30 years old as a potential piece to put the Montreal Canadiens over the top, and then they go out and get their French-Canadian center when he's 30 years old, and maybe he's won a cup in LA, and now the top 2 centers in Montreal are Nick Suzuki and Pierre-Luc Dubois. And now he's making 8.5 instead of, a number that he signed him to a deal that would have been higher than Caulfield and Suzuki. I mean, it may not matter to him one bit, but that's something that I've been giving a lot of thought the last little while. And just one other quick thing about Pierre-Luc Dubois. I know some fans are down on him, and, Pierre-Luc Dubois did not quit on the Winnipeg Jets. He played hard for them. His numbers did dip. There's no doubt about that. But this is a guy who is very available to the media, Sean. He played hard. And, one thing I'm not surprised about LA, we've talked about this privately and on some other, other situations. This is a guy who loves sports. I can remember being on that trip in March with the Jets, just chatting, after practice at El Segundo at the practice rink. On their off day, Pierre-Luc Dubois went and watched LeBron James because he wanted to watch one of the best at his craft play basketball, and was able to just walk into, crypto.com arena and see one of the best guys. I mean, this is a guy who's probably going to be going to Dodger games. He's going to be going to soccer matches. It's going to be, on a Sunday, you can go to the rink in flip-flops for practice, and maybe you go over to the Rams game. I mean, he's a guy who loves fashion also. I think it's going to be a great fit for him. Game 5, he didn't play well. He had a lot of company. And I think Pierre-Luc Dubois was banged up as the series went on. I also watched him in Game 1 when he was one of the best players on the ice. So, it's not like he walked around and wasn't trying. Anyways.
Oh, they're giving it to you, boy.
Oh, it's okay. I don't mind. I don't mind. And there have been lots of players who didn't play hard. And I've said this often with Hustler on my weekly hits on Winnipeg Sports Talk. I mean, here's the thing, and I am not taking the Jets off the hook. They were terrible in Game 5. But if you look at the teams that the Vegas Golden Knights eliminated, in each of their 4 elimination games, they made their opponent look very ordinary and as though those guys quit. And I can assure you that none of Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl quit. Neither did, Jason Robertson and the Dallas Stars, and neither did, Tkachuk wasn't playing in the clincher, but I mean, they squeezed the life out of teams. That's what happened to me. That's how I assess what happened in those games. But for the Jets, hey, this is part of the reason why they're changing their core pieces. They have, when things have gotten hard, there have been times where it looks like they have let off the pedal, and that's part of the reason why they're going to be making moves, and part of the reason why we think this is the first domino and not a run it back situation where they're just moving Pierre-Luc Dubois. Sean, don't you agree there? I mean, I expect Wheeler to be bought out here in the next couple of days before the 30th. And then it's entirely possible. This is something that you said this months ago, and I thought you were out of your mind when you said it, with all due respect. There is a possibility that the Jets open next year with Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuck on the roster. Now, I do think there's still a good chance they could be moved if the offers improve. To this point, I don't think there's been anything close to what the Jets would consider a fair offer for either one of those players, which is the exact same scenario we saw with Dubois until the LA Kings stepped up here in the last week.
Yeah. No doubt. But before we do, one of the things we'll have to get in and talk about, and we'll talk about that in the show tomorrow, is the idea that one thing that LA has done for themselves here is they've taken any kind of worry about the center position away for a long time, right? Like they've got three really big, solid, defensively sound, offensively capable center that they're going to be able to deal with for a long time. The Winnipeg Jets, after moving that center out, it's something that we aren't really talking about. That's one out of the mix now. You're down to Mark Scheifele and you're down to Adam Lowry. Mark Scheifele expected to go in this situation, depending on whether or not they get something. One of the things that we'll have to start talking about is the idea of what the Winnipeg Jets are going to look like down the middle. And hey, not everything is a guarantee, because if we remember that Patrick Laine trade, the talk about, Adam Lowry and Mark Scheifele and Pierre-Luc Dubois down the middle, the Jets were supposed to be unstoppable with what they had down the middle. And it did not turn out to be that way, right? The last couple of years, the Winnipeg Jets have been a pretty, fairly easy team to play against. So that hasn't really worked out that way. So I'm not saying it'll work out that way in LA. That said, what you have with the two existing centers already there, Phil Deneau has showed that he is just, no one likes playing against Phil Deneau. So that clearly is,
including Mark Scheifele.
Yes, Pierre-Luc Dubois gets to go into a situation now where if he's the third guy behind those guys, we know what he's capable of in doing and drawing penalties and all those different kind of things, and taking over games physically. That team could be monstrous and really could end up being what the Winnipeg Jets thought they were going to be down the middle for the last little while here. We'll have to get into the conversation of what the Jets are going to look like down the middle. I do want to give a shout out. We were talking about our summertime friends. Well, friends year-round for us are always our friends at Home Field, who do an absolutely great job for us. Our intro video, our extra video, that's going to need some tweaking down the stretch here. I'm sure we'll be back having those conversations with them. And it's not a we've got you covered situation, but of course our friends at the Johnston Group are friends for as long as we can remember. They are the Kenny and Renny OGs. We love those folks over at the Johnston Group. They have been with us since day one and continue every single time we go to them and have a conversation with them at the Johnston Group about wanting to come on board and take a little ride with us. They choose to every single time. We really appreciate that. The Kenny and Renny OGs at the Johnston Group. Ken, before we go, it was brought up a couple times. I should say, if anyone was asking what's happening on the lip, no, it's not herpes simplex 3 or whatever a cold sore is. I'm glad it looks like that. 2 days ago, I guess not 2 days ago, Friday evening on my birthday, I took a puck to the mouth in a pickup game of hockey, and my tooth, which is in right now, let's see what happens to it over the next little while, was out lying on the ice. Thank you to my goaltender who found it. I jammed it back in as I drove towards the hospital. The dentist said I put it back in as good as I possibly could have.
High character player, that Reynolds, blocking shots in a summertime pickup game, folks.
Yes. No doubt. This lip was split wide open. I can't believe how good it looks. I'm down with my boss, Leah Lawfer, who is producing for me on this trip right now. And at 4 a.m, when I was trying to get stitched up in the emergency room, I told her about what was happening. She said, send me a picture right now. I need to know what we're dealing with for coverage. And at the time, she was beside herself because this thing was wide open. I can't believe how much it's healed over the last couple of days. But to have this and have people just look at you and think, I think that guy's got herpes, I'm not going to share a water bottle with him, is the best case scenario right now in this situation. I'm glad the tooth is in. I'm glad the lip is closed up. It's not the best birthday present I've got, but it's definitely could have been a far worse birthday present than it was. Ken, anything to say before we shut this down?
No, good to see you. Lots of fun here. And we also, I think we're going to try for a draft preview tomorrow. We're just kind of waiting on some timing. So we appreciate the folks that have come in on the pop-up here. Just awesome numbers, over 400 at one point in the live chat, which is absolutely fantastic. We know it'll be a busy week here, lots to discuss. And we've got some surprises in store over the course of this week as we go wall to wall on the NHL draft coverage and the corresponding Jets news and moves that should be happening leading up to free agency and right through it. So we appreciate the folks hopping on quickly. This will be available on podcast shortly. And yeah, buddy, keep the hits flowing here. Fun day. These are the days that we live for, and we'll keep cranking it out as best we can here.
Yeah, I got to say, just a shout out to our audience here right now. At one point, we had over 400 people in here. We know because of my job and my responsibilities, like Ken all day has been like, when can we do this? When can we do this? When can we do this? And I can't give him an answer. I've got to work on the ground here first and get to doing this second. So the fact that our audience showed up when you showed up, I know it looked like we were going up at 4, and then all of a sudden we were going up at 4:30. The fact that as many of you showed up just once again shows that Kenny and Renny are the luckiest guys in the business, because we've got the best audience in the business. Thank you for supporting us. And I'll leave you with this, as we always say, if you appreciate the conversations happening in these spaces, please appreciate our sponsors who fight to keep these conversations going in these spaces for us today. That's the Keg and Pristine Roofing, who we're so happy to have as our summertime friends, and the Johnson Group, who's always there for us, Home Field as well. Thank you so much to all of them. And mostly, thank you to all of you who are here and who will be listening to this on podcast later and checking this out later. It means a ton that you're here with us. We've missed you. We're glad to be back for a little bit this week. We're going to give you the best coverage we can through the draft, through these trades, and through July 1st and free agency day. Thank you so much for that. Ken, great to see you, my friend. We will see all of you tomorrow for a draft preview show whenever we can get that show up and running. Thank you so much.
The Kenny and Renny Show is brought to you by Home Field, Cambrian Credit Union, Lou Ferlin, Trans-Canada Brewing, Vittorio Rossi, and Johnston Group.